it's a real pleasure to be here today talking to Eve Jardine-Young, who's the principal of Cheltenham Ladies College, and she's also chair of WILSA, the World Leading Schools Association. Now, not everybody will know about WILSA, Eve, so tell us about WILSA.
Helen, thank you so much. Yes, WILSA is a wonderful organisation. We're essentially a non-profit, and we are a community, a network of schools scattered all over the world, actually, with quite a lot in China and Asia, but also North America, Europe, Africa, Australia, really pretty much every continent. We don't yet have Antarctica, anyone on the South Pole, but really sort of like-minded schools who have real aspiration and ambition for their students and their young people, always of secondary school age rather than primary school, but ideally with some shared values. So I'm quite sure that one or two of the people listening to this might be thinking, I wonder what the criteria are for leading.
Yes,
yes. It's a very loaded word, isn't it? Or based on what? Based on exam results, based on what? So obviously the fact that it's an international network means that no school, or we all do not have the same homogenous educational output. We're preparing pupils for a variety of national and or international qualifications and programs, and comparison is not going to be well suited to the empirical data, I would say. So it's more a case of finding out whether the values are shared and really whether there is passion for leadership, passion for the education of the whole child, the whole young person. Are we attending to their sort of spiritual, mental and emotional health and their ideas and their skills and capabilities, and also to deepen their understanding of world affairs and other cultures. And it sort of came from a place of deepening, a wish to deepen the intercultural understanding through not just a sort of tourist experience, but to have exchanges, have visits, have staff and student exchanges, and maybe conferences as well that bring the WILSA member schools into one place, but really quite purposeful, and also maybe within a context of having known a bit about each other already, or continuing those connections after those events are over. So it's been in existence now for nearly 10 years. And it's been, it's an exciting network. So thank you for the opportunity to tell people a little bit more about it.
That's great, and I do have a bit of a vested interest, because I remember being around when it was starting up, and I just think it's great, and I like that this it's the World Leading Schools Association. So that leading bit is, I mean, how would you define that? What is a leading school, or is it schools leading other schools? I mean, what does that mean to you?
Helen, good, very perceptive question. So I think certainly the wish going forward is that we provide educational experiences, insights, fellowship, perhaps research, publications and networking opportunities that do indirectly form some thought leadership about education, about pedagogy, about the relevance of our current educational practices to the needs really of the 21st century workforce. So there's an aspiration to lead, perhaps by example, by inspiration, but ostensibly it was the first interpretation of leading, which is at the top of their field. So we wouldn't necessarily be saying, the top performing schools, but schools that are really in the sort of the A-list group, if you like. And I know all of these categories are terribly nebulous. There is a set of criteria for application for membership of the organisation. So normally the schools would prepare an application, the board would review it, and there's a lot of really evidence base there of what goes on in the school, what are the achievements of its pupils across a wide variety of things like sport, art, music, drama, the participation in wider student conferences, events, competitions, that sort of thing. So it's not rigorously, as I say, empirically driven, but you find yourself in a fellowship of equals, really, where there's probably, regardless of the country that you're in, the hopes, the dreams, the aspirations of your young people, and perhaps the pressure to succeed, perhaps as well. People sign their children up to our schools with the hope and expectation that something good is really going to happen, that there's going to be fulfillment of potential, that there's going to be the development of them as a character and their skills. So there is also that piece around how you balance personal fulfillment against the sort of the pressures to succeed, and can you find that balance? So lots of shared conversations like that too.
Yeah, and that's a really big question anyway. And I was on a board meeting earlier today, and another school, we were actually talking about that very issue, that desire for the it's so important that in schools we're helping people grow into who they are, but there are these pressures about what that looks like. And of course, the view of what that looks like is shaped by so many other different stakeholders, parents, society, and the media, all of that. And do you, from your experience of the schools that you've met through WALSA, do you see that that's a shared issue, a shared problem that schools are battling with in some ways, or are the people who've got the solution out there?
Yeah, Helen, great question. I think probably, I hope I'd be speaking for most of our member schools in that we're seeking to find that sweet spot where it doesn't have to be a binary choice of one or the other. Perhaps at the extremes, if you pursue exam performance results, sort of empirical measurable data outcomes at all costs, at the expense of all else, then it's not the place that we want to be taking a truly leading educational experience. If you allow for a narrative that says, well, your exams don't matter, do all these other wonderful things instead, and that's how you can spend all of your time. For lots of our students and families and staff, really, that could also be equally not serving the pupils' needs well either. Does it have to be that trade-off? Or is there somewhere in the middle where it's moderation, but it's intentional, there's more feelings of control of what that balance is for you? And I love perhaps where one of your earlier questions was heading, which is, what are the criteria of success for each family, for each member of each family? Is it about performing grades? Is it about success of university admission? Is it being as good as your brother or your sister was? Or perhaps all of us as parents, do we try and live out by proxy through our children something of our own education that either was good or the bit that didn't happen very well, and you sort of live that out through your children? So who is all this for, really? So being a safe space, if I could use that phrase, where within the years that you're at secondary school, which are such formative years, aren't they? Such formative years where you're emerging from childhood and you're beginning to really recognize that the world is not straightforward, black and white. There's an awful lot of complexity about almost every issue is not as straightforward as it might once have seemed when you were 6, and all of the processes of adolescence and the neurological development and changes of the human brain and other bits of us that can lead to a period of enormous insecurity and questioning, and what's the point of everything, and is there a God, and why, and what's, if the whole climate change agenda is going to doom the planet, then what's the point, and all that nihilism that can often come into the picture as well during your adolescent years in particular, where you're questioning and challenging authority and established systems and regimes. So for us, I think as educators, it's a very exciting place to be because it's never dull and you always have that vibrancy. But we're very well aware nowadays in particular that we are educating probably the best informed generation that has ever lived. And are they suffering from almost information overload, just so much information, and you go a bit snowblind amongst the quantity of incoming? How can we help them to get the tools to discern, what is good information, what is an echo chamber, what needs to be a divergence of your viewfinder, to be open-minded, to challenge your perspectives, those kinds of things, and maybe really focusing on your mindset and I know with the people will talk about growth mindsets as well, of just being open-minded and not closing yourself down on that through those years. I think in most of our member schools, those are the motivations that are driving a lot of what the provision of education is, regardless of the fact that might look very different if you're in India or you're in Canada or you're in, you know, UK or America, for example.
And that's the challenge, isn't it? Because this is a global organisation also.
Yeah.
So you have schools in, as you said, everywhere apart from Antarctica. But how do you manage it? I mean, what are the challenges for making sure that you're leveraging what's great in there, bringing the ideas forward, taking them even further forward? What are the challenges there? What are the opportunities?
Yeah. Again, great question. Thank you. These are very thought-provoking questions, aren't they? I think probably 10 years in, now that it is a mature organisation rather than a startup concept, these are questions that the board and the organisation as a whole are revisiting, if I'm honest, thinking, okay, let's look now at 2030. Yes. You know, what does this decade need to look like by way of what that networking to the mutual benefit of everybody, what could that be now that we have an organisation where we have reached a degree of shared understanding about what matters. I think some of the value of that networking, if we can harness, probably what COVID has taught us really is harness the technological efficiencies. We can collapse the miles between us. If we don't mind a few late night hours or early morning hours, we can actually jump into a shared space for conversation with each other. Whereas before, this was really by exception. And almost if nothing else is possible, we can do it. But now we're all doing it as the norm, and everybody's comfort with it perhaps is a bit higher, and people are a little bit more at ease and a bit more relaxed and a little bit less horrified at the sight of themselves in the corner of the screen for the whole day. I can't say I've yet come to terms with this myself, but anyway, we've got no option but to persevere. But actually, for people who would otherwise have financial barriers to travelling all over the place, and certainly I'm sure every teacher and every head and everyone involved in schools is the servant of the academic cycle. So, you know, there are certain times of year where you just can't release staff to go off and do things. So what we're hoping is that for this next period, maybe it's going to be months or a year or so. We're very excited within the last 24 hours of this interview, Helen, we've had something about a vaccine for COVID. Who knows whether this is the light bulb moment or not? It may not be, but anyway, at least there's a bit of hope that there might be an end at some point. But even so, I think we're all wanting to hold on to the gains from this period and thinking, what actually have we learned about what is the art of the possible to connect? And you can connect pupils, connect faculty and staff, and you suddenly collapse that affordability barrier. And maybe the opportunity cost of everybody's time. People have got some of those travel margins of time released back to them, that they might be more inclined to sign up for panel webinars or shared experiences which are online. I think one of the challenges which you have pointed me in the direction of what are the challenges. The examination systems are so different in some of our countries, I mean, radically different, that some of the conversations that you might sort of habitually fall into within your peer group, within your own nation state, are just absurd. You just end up, they're meaningless. You can't have those conversations. So that means there isn't necessarily that sort of granular understanding of each other's world in the way that it would be if you were within your own nation state of schools. But sometimes that means you don't get dragged into the weeds of all that detail. Oh, the exam boards, oh, the government, you know, oh, all the things that are wrong or challenging or have been problematic, because it's a pointless conversation. So actually people find themselves elevated to a much higher altitude conversational content, actually about humanity, about people, about what matters, what is family life, what about life expectancy in the, you know, affluent countries, societies that we probably most of our pupils and schools originate from, might reasonably be expected to have long lives, but probably long working lives, because there will be no pensions to sustain us all going forward in 2050, 2060 in the way they might have done 50 years ago. So your relationship with work and your relationship with your purpose and feelings of satisfaction with your life become more important to add weight to, because you may be in your mid-80s and still in full-time employment, because unless you're very successful and wealthy, how can you not be?
Yes.
So I think it's exciting because you get released from the weeds, if I could call it that, of the black hole that sometimes drags us down into the chambers of exchanging grievances and complaints about what's difficult, with your peers. It's a whole different narrative, really, and it can be very invigorating.
And have you picked up, because that's really interesting, and I completely agree with you, and I like living up there and not in the weeds. Have you picked up from colleagues and heads in other schools across the world how they view the UK system? Because that would be interesting to know. Have you been able to pick that up or not?
I think it's, I hesitate to make too many generalizations. I certainly would offer you the insights that I've had so far, and that is, for historical reasons that I'm sure everybody could offer a view about, the British export of our educational model and systems, which may have had its roots in the English-speaking world, post-colonial, there's a whole chapter really from mid-19th century onwards about how the world is how it is now, which is topical and important, and probably we haven't thought about that enough explicitly within our schools for a while. So watch this space. But A-levels are taught and studied internationally, and the only other big qualification, sort of the International Baccalaureate, which also has that global span. Not every country's national qualifications are exported in the same way and sat in other schools. You might have a bit of that through the American school systems, etc., or SATs that people take for a specific purpose, perhaps.
Australia as well.
Exactly, but I think we are unusual in that sense. One could say we're punching above our weight to a degree in terms of the importance or the respect with which our educational models have been felt to be valuable, aspirational, gold standard, whatever, something that is a good benchmark against which other people could compare what they would wish to do or vary. So the educational experience within the UK itself, if you don't live in the UK, brings you into this question of boarding. Would you wish to send your child to the UK to consume an education and be educated there, even if you live in another country? Thereby, by inference, you are saying that is better than anything that my children could access within this country as a day pupil. I choose this instead. And that for you've done this, Helen, you've run a boarding school for a long time, and
hundreds of years, I think.
It's a huge responsibility, isn't it? You feel the trust and the faith that each family, each set of parents places in you and your staff to do the very best for their daughters or sons. And that is I think that's very motivational, and we would, in our schools, we would certainly wish to live up to that faith that's been placed in us, and we are committed, most of us are offering this broader experience. So you have your lessons, and we should be equipping you to do well in your exams, but at the same time there's an important conversation about who you are becoming while you're getting your grades. And that can be very, very much enriched by being at school with people who are not from your immediate hometown or your immediate catchment area, who live in different countries, who come from different backgrounds, might even come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. A lot of our schools are investing in more needs-blind resources and fundraising to try and widen access because of the affordability challenges of an independent education for us in any country, I guess, but explicitly in the UK, I know that's a really important theme now for virtually every school. And that breadth of educational opportunity is about antidoting the narrowing that could come from the gradual narrowing of your academic subject pursuit specialisms as you get older. So we would love, at our school, we would love to have, we have, wide range of speakers. Nowadays under COVID, they don't all physically come, but they still access the pupil body. Mathematicians at sixth form who are in a history of art lecture, or cross-curricular lectures that don't very tidily fit in any one academic category, but actually it's really stimulating and quite challenging. So those are, I guess, activities that each school will reinvent that program according to their context. But there's a lot of passion for the outcomes that come from creating a culture in a school where that is normal, and that is what is expected for everybody.
And available to all as well. I mean, there's something there. I mean, one of the things that I feel about global competence, about that ability to be able to understand, to deal with people, to be able, from wherever they come, and to be able to communicate, to have an understanding of otherness and difference as well. One of the things I feel about that is that I feel it really underpins social mobility, and it's that sense of social mobility is about having choices. And if you are more able to deal with more people in more parts of the world, however, and of course via technology, we're able to do that now, then you have more choices. And for me, it seems that one of our major tasks as educators over the next decade or so, if only we could do it for tomorrow, is to make that accessible to everyone somehow. And that is a tough ask, I know. But do you have that sense with the people who you're meeting through Wolsa? There's that desire to elevate the quality of education with a capital E to everybody? Because I mean, I feel that drives me.
Yeah, Helen, I really do. I think there's occasionally a frustration expressed by people who are in a country where there's almost the politicization of the education agenda. So if you have a change of democratically elected party from either left to right, right to left, coalitions, whatever, just change, just churn. And that in turn drags an impact into what is going on in schools. Subject accessibility, creative arts, performing arts, the value of the arts over STEM and the sciences. The debates about pedagogy, about things like class sizes, the role of AI, the agency of the learner, as opposed to the sort of sage on the stage, old school teaching. How are you taught? How is your learning being facilitated in different models? And what is scalable? Actually, what works when you actually do a bigger rollout rather than just in one particular school where all of the factors are aligning nicely for you. So, I mean, these are really powerful conversations, and I think you're absolutely right. At the heart of the Wilson mission, and certainly Jack Gia and Tony Little, who founded Wilson, who I'm sure that you would have worked with closely in those formative years.
Many people will know,
Incredible men. So the former headmaster of Eton and Jack, there is only one Jack, who sort of hails from China but was educated partly in Europe, and has an incredibly almost sort of ahead of his time really thought trajectory around the art of the possible and what our shared endeavors could be as humanity across our different cultures, to find the synergies between them and deepen the understanding, so that you don't fall into these lazy habits or lazy acceptance of other people's habits of stereotyping and superficial generalizations about cultures or nationalities or these people, as you said, the other, them rather than us, who, however you choose to draw the boundary in your life. Is it on race, ethnicity, language, faith, gender, whatever it might be, who's got enough money, who's not got enough money, etc. So all of those are the barriers that actually are man-made constructs often, aren't they, and arise from a place of fear. And perhaps education is trying to put enough rocket fuel in the tank of young people who become older people. Obviously, the young people are the 40-year-olds of the future and the 60-year-olds of the future, to just invite people to put aside their fear and to go with their curiosity and their faith in each other's shared humanity. So I'm as I get older, I think I'm more and more convinced that most behavior by human beings arises from a place of love or a place of fear. In some manifestation or other, you can trace most of the roots of our impulses to one or other of those two things. And the more that love can be in the ascendant and prevalent, and the fear gets the volume turned down, the more productive everybody will be, and the happier everyone will be, and hopefully conflict will be less, and where it arises, people are better equipped to find the resolutions to it and find those compromises and a way through, really, somehow.
So on the assumption that schools are, as we know, pushing the boundaries all the time, moving forward towards that goal, where do you think schools will be in 5-10 years' time? If you could look in a crystal ball, where will they be? What will they be driving forward? What kind of impact will they have had on the world?
Well, Helen, I think it's such a timely question, because we're still in the middle of the global pandemic. Well, I say the middle, who knows? Are we at the beginning? Are we in the middle? Are we near the end? Who knows? We're certainly in it, aren't we, at this moment? And I think, for me, where my personal viewfinder is at the moment is we're at a point of inflection, because with regards to the educational piece, because the curve we were on was very much in the literature, in a lot of the debate, you were picking up this sort of AI, artificial intelligence, to what degree eventually will that substitute for human beings? And will there be, is there actually an inbuilt obsolescence within our current school models? Will there be, in my case, will there be a Cheltenham Ladies College that looks resembles anything like this in another 20 or 30 years' time? Who knows? But I think what I'm seeing after this pandemic period, and certainly the effects of the lockdown, probably more than the pandemic, it's our response to the pandemic more than the pandemic itself, is how utterly social creatures we are.
Yeah.
And when I look at staff surveys, pupil surveys about what they've missed, there has been a really strong recognition of the benefits technology has given us to survive the worst effects of these lockdowns and still be able to access, as long as you've got access to the technology, to your earlier point about for all, and there's digital gap there that is, yawning its jaws ever wider potentially. But if you've got access to the technology, you have the portals to knowledge and education, and actually almost self-teaching if you've got learning power and learning skills that are there, if you've got an inclination. However, what everyone is missing, and what the staff, I think we've almost surprised ourselves by how much we are grieving for its absence, is organic, spontaneous conversation. There's had to be an awful lot of scaffolding. Right, I will talk to you about this at this time, because we're going to have to do that via a technological medium. Whereas just arriving at I think the Americans sometimes call it the water cooler conversations, people just doing their thing and finding that they have congregated naturally to staff rooms or to common rooms or to communal areas or playgrounds or wherever it might be. But there's something there. It's not only about getting to the hot water supply for your coffee and tea and something to eat. It is also about the communion with others that happens when you're there, and allows you to be quite passive about it. You don't have to be the life and soul of the party, but you are witnessing joy and laughter and spontaneity and the chemistry of people who don't have to have a purpose for the conversation. They're just chatting. And there's this very informal sharing of insights and information. I don't know if you'd agree, Helen, from your knowledge of staff rooms, that the proportion of time that teachers, for my 30 years in education, we're always talking about the kids. You spend all day with the kids, and then you go and listen at lunchtime. You might talk about the American election for a few minutes, and then it's like, year 9, set 3, good grief, talking about the kids, because actually, guess what? We quite like kids. We actually enjoy their company. And although we might be moaning and tutting about a few things, actually, you know, there is that innate, there's a commitment to each other. And I think why I'm saying a point of inflection is I think there were people who were very convinced that it was almost a matter of time before there was this, not necessarily total, but quite a big substitutability effect of technology and advanced AI substituting for the sage and the guide and the facilitator. Now, there will be a place for that technology, undoubtedly, to raise efficiencies and to give independent learning, you know, autonomy, and people who go at their own pace, certainly for extension work and wider work if you want to. But what I think we are having to reassess is just the value, not just how much we like it, or perhaps we're habituated to it, but how people have missed it. They've missed vertical mixing, they've missed the older ones chatting to the younger ones and vice versa. We've missed people across different faculties, you know, don't break the bubbles. Oh, you know, we're all terrified of infection, we must not break the bubbles. So we're operating with all of these almost glass partitions now between us all, psychologically and physically, that are very, very inhibiting within a normal sort of school day. And the findings from this are unambiguously that people feel that they are more impoverished as a result, and that when you're doing blended teaching, where you've got some of the class in front of you and some of them remotely, that is the most challenging of all, to find the best balance. So I'm sure there'll be lots of exchanges of learning and best practice that emerge on the wings of all of this very soon. But I'm hoping that we have reassessed the value we bring to each other when we really show up together ideally in person, without the intentionality and therefore inevitably the loss of the spontaneity that happens when you have to do everything to a more of a prescriptive pattern.
And to be able to get that blend of being able to do things in person in one place, remotely with other places, and in person in other places as well. The richness that there is.
Amazing. Yeah. And if we can then almost cherry pick that eclectic combination of the best of what both times have to offer, then that could be really extraordinary, I think. And then lastly, I suppose, Helen, I'd love to ask you what you think about this. You know, how do we protect the time for reflection? I always have this image, because I grew up in the 1980s with very elementary computers, you know, the sort of BBC computer and the Commodore 64 and computers like that, cranking away. But there used to be times where they would suddenly whir away by themselves in the room, because it was RAM sorting its own memory and just reorganizing its data quietly when we weren't using the keyboards. And I often feel that my brain is like, our brains are a little bit like that we are so potentially overstimulated that this almost monotasking discipline rather than multitasking virtues, you know, how do we equip ourselves, not only our young people, but how do we as the grown-ups, so-called grown-ups as a society, really find that balance to give ourselves the oxygen mask to put on and the time to reflect on what just happened, the conversations we've just had, what we really believe about things, what is our response to something that's just happened or a question's been asked, rather than the frenzy and the pace picking up again. So I feel lockdown actually put the handbrake on everyone to a degree, not everyone, but so much of the world has been forced into at least a slowing, if not a complete stopping, that the benefits of some of that slow time, I think people have found it to be really precious. And, you know, it's going to be really interesting whether we build out of this period into the green tech and the more, you know, balanced, holistic, mindfulness, well-being. I don't know what you want to call it. You can label it those things, but we all know when we're burning out, and we know when we've actually got a better balance in our lives, however that's being achieved. And, you know, that my fear is that we're all so habituated and conditioned to one kind of way of living in society that the pull of that is tempting. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could we
Yes.
could do something else?
Yeah. Well, maybe it's about growing and growing structures, discipline around the space that there is. And in a sense, that's what our conversation has been today. We created a structure. Wasn't quite the water cooler moment because we created it. We came together. We created.
There was a plan.
That's right. But look at the space that we had within it. Look what we discussed. Look what we've been through. Thank you, Eve, so much for this. This has been just
do you know, it's the most enjoyable conversation I've had for quite some time. So thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Lovely to see you. Thanks, Helen. Bye.
Bye.